Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the final session of our NPTEL course, Appreciating Linguistics, a Typological Approach. I remember delivering the introductory lecture at the beginning of the session, and we have reached to the conclusion now, and the course has come to an end. So here I have a few concluding remarks. I just want to refresh your memory what all we have studied so far. I'm sure a lot of things have been comprehensible to you. There would be a couple of things which you could not understand. I would request you to write to me or to get back to me, contact me wherever or whenever you find there is a difficulty. I'll try to clarify your doubts as quickly as possible. Maybe one or two live sessions can be conducted, maybe one to clarify if you have any doubts further, right. What I'll do now, I'll just give you a summarized form of the course, like summarized form of the course content that we have had. But before that, let me give you an idea what this course was supposed to be. When I began with this, or when I started off this journey, what idea did I have in mind, and let's see how far I have reached. I am not sure if I could reach the ultimate destination, whether all the objectives that I had and then all the course content that I have designed, whether they are in alignment with each other or not. Your feedback would tell me that. Personally, I believe yes, most of the components I have covered as I have promised or as I planned so far, and if a couple of things are left, it can be taken up in an advanced level course, which I already have in plan in my mind. Sooner or later, I am going to offer a little advanced level course as far as typology is concerned, maybe focusing on only the morphosyntactic component of it. That's my area of interest, that's my thrust area, and then I love teaching morphology and syntax plus a bit of pragmatics. So, pragmatics hasn't been explored nicely in this course. I agree with that, and that is how my plan was. My focus was supposed to be more on morphosyntactic aspect with lexical, phonological and semantic and pragmatic typology, but pragmatic and semantic typology need to be fleshed out more because these are the more advanced and more abstract level courses, more abstract understanding. So, I am planning for the next course primarily on morphosyntactic and pragmatic or semantico-pragmatic typology of language. So, let us see when I am going to achieve that. But first thing first, let us look at what this course was supposed to be. Let us begin with the day one, what I had in mind when I conceived this course, when I conceptualized the course plan. Okay. So, I start with the intention or the idea that I had when I thought about this course. Primarily, look at the first point. What was this course designed for? What was its objective? What was the intention of drafting such a course? It's considered to be an introductory course. At the same time, it would link to some advanced concepts. So, it is like in the middle of intro and like introductory and advanced. I do not know, maybe I can call it a mid-level course or something. But I remember when I started off this journey, I had in mind, I had this idea in mind that I am going to keep it very simple, almost like it will be meant for everyone. But gradually I realized towards the end of the course, I became a more technical jargon centric words have been used, and I became a little more advanced, which is okay, because when you kind of went through a couple of very simple units, you may expect the last stage of the course, towards the end of or towards the completion of the course, it should give you some food for thought, so that you can think about a little advanced courses or little advanced components, right. To begin with, the primary objective of the course was to make the participants aware about the importance of linguistics as a discipline. I will share my story, and it is a story of all linguists out there, the first question that we encounter from a non-linguist, for that matter a layperson, is that how many languages do you speak? And this is, believe me, this is the most irritating question. And the second irritating question is that when I say I am teaching linguistics, I would encounter the next question, which language? So, teaching linguistics does not mean that we are teaching languages. Language teaching is an aspect of linguistics, and it's coming under the category or in the domain of applied linguistics. That is very much in the purview of linguistics, under the domain of linguistics, but that is not what I do. I do not teach languages, period, right? I teach linguistics. So, like whether it is descriptive or prescriptive, that is a different story, and we have already discussed a lot about it in the introductory sessions. When I say I teach linguistics, I am trying to understand languages in general, right. So, it is the study of language, it is a scientific study. When I say scientific study, I have already mentioned it is a more systematic technical domain, right. So, for your kind information, I am not teaching any particular language, be it English or Hindi or anything else. For that matter, I do not know many languages. I, much like an average Indian, I also speak 3 languages, and because most of us are multilingual, believe me. And these are the 2 questions that most of the linguists encounter: how many languages do you speak, and which language do you teach as a linguist? Then the third question sometimes I encounter, which in IIT I am not asked this very often, but a couple of colleagues have already asked me that when I say, oh yeah, so which department do you come from? I would say I am from humanities and social sciences. What do you teach? I teach linguistics. So then the next statement they would make is that, would you please help me, let us say, copy editing my draft. Let us say they are writing a research proposal, and then they need somebody to copy edit it or to proofread it or to sort of review it. Review, not technical review, it is just the stylistic review, formatting and other stuff, typos and stuff like that. So that is also another very frustrating situation that I find myself in most of the cases. Okay, that is also a part of language, or a part that also this particular profession is also covered under the territory, like under the domain of linguistics, but linguistics is just not restricted, or linguistics is not restricted to just copy editing or translating or reviewing or proofreading or language teaching. It has a huge broader aspect, like it has a huge broader domain, and which is extremely interdisciplinary in nature. So, my idea was to make the participants aware about the vastness of linguistics as an academic discipline. So, that is why I chose this title, Appreciating Linguistics, and I proceeded further with a typological approach. So, I did find out which language belongs to which type, and then what do we understand by language typology, how the formalists understand it, how the functionalists understand it. So, these are like 2 different, a couple of different things, a lot of discussions we have had. So, if you look at what I have written on the slide, the very first point I have written, this course appreciates linguistics as an academic discipline. I hope after you completed this course, you would be a little more respectful for my discipline. Now, this is your discipline too, right? If you are a beginner, if you have not had any linguistics course before, I hope you would, this course might have ignited some kind of interest, respect and appreciation for this discipline after you complete this course. If you have already been there in linguistics, something like been there, done that, if you have already done it and you know what linguistics is, and you are familiar with the basic fundamental conceptual things, I am sure after you finish this course, it would have increased, like it would have helped you to appreciate it a little more. So, the respect for this discipline might have, ideally it should have, I do not know whether it happened or not, I am really not sure about it, I will check the feedback later. So, but then I am sure at least some of you would have been more motivated, some of you would have been more sort of interested to know about this discipline more, and it would, in a sense, your appreciation for this discipline has been increased, right. So, that is the reason why the title of the course was Appreciating Linguistics, a Typological Approach. So, that is the first thing. This course appreciates linguistics as an academic discipline, which focuses on the understanding of what is natural language. So, every now and then I kind of talk about language with a big L, language with a small l. So, these are like what is a what do you mean by natural language, and then how natural language is. In the introductory sessions, I think I have already talked about it, how it is different from, let us say, machine language, how it is different from let us say sign language. So, these are the things you might have remembered from the very beginning. And it also, the course also focuses on the systematicity of language comparison. So, what does it deal with? So, if when we say typology, that means we are comparing languages systematically. So, this systematicity of language would help us to understand how linguistics is not restricted just to language teaching or let us say proofreading or copy editing or translating. There has been more, way more things to know about this discipline. So, the systematicity of language comparison would give us an idea how wide and how diverse the linguistic scenario of this world is, right. And taking into account South Asian languages or Indian languages, it is again it is a fantastic area to study more about linguistic typology. So, this course I did not really focus much on South Asian languages, I just gave you a couple of examples here and there from Hindi and Odia, because it was not really a South Asian language specific course. This was just a typological course from different languages of the world, and my primary reference was Edith Morabzik's book, like Introducing Language Typology, published by Cambridge University Press. So, I got the data, arguments, everything directly from the book. So, that has been my first point of reference, and all the data, all the examples that you have seen, mostly they have come from this book, right. So, I did not really restrict it to South Asian languages, except or yeah, so maybe a couple of Hindi, Odia, Bangla example I might have given once a while, but primarily it is world's languages. Okay. Then the second point, so this course also investigates both the structure and then the usage of language. So, when I say structure, I am targeting the formal typology, when I say function, I am targeting the usage, like when I say usage, I am targeting the functional typology, right. So, we are just not talking about the use of language, we are also talking about the form of language. And when I say form or when I say structure, I am talking about the form of the sentence, form of the words, form of a sound, or like form of the sound system. So, everything. So, it could be formal typology and functional typology at the lexical level, morphological level, syntactic level and phonological level. So, that is about formal, and in the also semantic level. And in the functional level, we did talk about pragmatics, which is very brief. I agree, it has been a very brief discussion on pragmatic typology, because my plan is that I am going to let us say offer another advanced level course in pragmatic typology in the days to come. So, semantic and pragmatic typology have put it very minimal, not really much extensive, right. So, and I am aware about it. So, if you feel that it is very little, please pardon me, because this is how the course was planned for this time. This course definitely investigates both the structure, which is the form of language, and usage, which is the function of language. Then what I did, we did bring in a lot of empirical evidences, empirical examples. Using those, we have tried to understand the cross linguistic generalizations at different level, as discussed in Morabzik's book, right. So, that is why the third point says This course deals with the languages of the world in terms of grammatical features they have in common. So, when I was talking about Arabic and Rapa Nui, for example, or you can say Hindi and other Indo-Aryan languages, or Hindi and English, for example, whether we are going to write it as, or whether you are going to hold on just a minute. Okay. So, whether we are going to talk about Hindi and English as two typologically different languages, or sometimes there is a mother language which links to these two, that there must be some kind of similarity, some kind of differences. All of this have been discussed, and the grammatical features of these languages have been discussed, if not widely, but then in quite a bit of detailed manner at various levels: sound level, word level, and sentence level, right. Then the discussion eventually leads to language types and then implications. So, we talked about the implicational universals, absolute universals. Let us say we also found out how to trace, like how to identify certain universals in certain type and certain other universals in certain other type, right. So, these are when we talked about the universals, we did talk about the implications. So, eventually the discussion went ahead with the language universals and related issues in language typology. And finally, what the course was supposed to deal with is that to examine the data. And what data? The data from different languages in the world, the data from various language families, to understand how various grammatical constructions are realized in different languages. So, when I say grammatical constructions, let's take into account, or let's take into consideration word order. So, English is a language which has a different word order, Hindi is a language which has a different word order, and when we are trying to study the word order and its evolution, we realize that okay, so it's actually SOV which is considered to be the oldest form of the word order, and the rest of the forms have been derived differently, like have been derived later. And SOV and SVO are the most common ones, but OSV and OVS are the most rare ones. And why these are the rare and why these are the most common ones, how back and forth like the sentence final, sentence initial, or the final stage, medial stage and initial stage when we were talking about, we did have a discussion on that, right. So, this is what the course was supposed to be, the course was meant to be, and I hope I did justice to it by discussing issues related to, let us say I started the discussion with linguistics, some fundamental concepts. So, how to understand language typology and linguistics, and what are the fundamental concepts involved here. So, the discussion kicked off from there, or the course started from there, how to understand linguistics as an academic discipline, and within that what do you mean by language typology. Then I moved on to talk about lexical typology, which deals with words as a whole unit, then morphological typology, which probes further and tries to break the words into different parts and subparts, which are called as morphemes, and then we try to understand what are the generalizations which can be drawn at the lexical and the morphological level as far as typology is concerned. After the word level, then we moved to the sentence level, and in the sentence level we had syntactic typology, which is absolutely formal in nature. So, when I said I had a combination of formal discussions and functional discussions, syntactic typology is the domain where I was primarily talking about generative aspect of language, and how big L, and what is innateness of what is innateness hypothesis, what do you mean by language acquisition device, and why human beings like a human child is considered to have a language by default in the brain by the time she comes to the earth. And then eventually we move to what are the typological generalizations which can be drawn at the sentence level. So, that is about syntactic typology. So, what I did for all the units, I started with the discussions on individual term, then I moved to typology. Let us say I started what is lexicon. So, introductory remarks on lexicon, and after you understood what lexicon is, then we moved to lexical typology. Similarly, I started first I discussed what is a morpheme, what is morphology. So, after a couple of sessions on the discussion of morphology, we moved to morphological typology. Something similar I did it for syntactic and phonological typology too. I first talked about what is a phoneme, what is an allophone, what is neutralization, what is allophony. These are all the introductory remarks related to the discipline called phonology. And once you have an idea what is a consonant, what is a vowel, what is a diphthong, and how many diphthongs are there, how many vowels are there, whether it is same across the board or different languages have different phonological system. So, these are the introductory remarks related to linguistics as a discipline or phonetics as a branch of linguistics. And once you understood that, I have moved to phonological typology. Similar happened for syntactic typology too. So, first I discussed what is syntax, what do you understand by the word syntax, and why sentence is important, and what are the different ways to understand which sentence is grammatical, acceptable, unacceptable, ungrammatical. All these discipline specific jargons have been thrashed out or like has been fleshed out, and after that I have moved to syntactic typology. That has been that has been the way I have worked throughout the course. For semantics also I did the same, and for pragmatics also I did the same. But the difference between semantic and pragmatics is that I did not really highlight on the cross linguistic generalizations as I did for the other units. For lexical, morphological, syntactic and phonetic or phonological, we did have discussions on the introductory remarks, plus we moved to the cross linguistic generalizations. But in case of semantic and pragmatic typology, it was more about the general discussions and how the meaning change happens, because I believe there has been a lot of overlapping between semantic typology and pragmatic typology, because they are bound with the common thread. And what is that common thread? Meaning, right. So, both the domains, like both pragmatic typology and semantic typology, they do talk about meaning and meaning change. So, that is why I have put them together, and if time permits later maybe I will offer an advanced course related to semantic pragmatic typology in a more detail. Clear? So, after this domain specific discussions, eventually I have moved to one of the most important sections of the course, that is discussing language universals. So, what do you mean by universal? So, do you think there is something universal in the world's language, and how the formalists understand universals and how the functionalists understand universal? One school of thought talks about having bigger sample size, identifying commonalities or differences, taking into account more number of languages into study. But then the other side of the school, which is the formal typology, like the formal generative linguists, they would say, or for that matter Chomsky, one is the Greenbergian or functional typological universal, the other one is Chomskyan generativist approach. So, in this case universals have been studied not with a huge sample set, rather with a restricted set of languages or restricted sample, but an in-depth study. So, when I say in-depth study, even it's just a handful of 5 languages, but each of the grammatical situation or each of the grammatical feature has been identified or has been examined in minute details. So, that is what formal typologists would do to understand universals. On the other hand, the functional typologists would try to consider as many languages as possible, huge sample size, and taking into account how these grammatical features are manifested in different languages, the cross linguistic generalization has been has been crafted, right. So, that was about language universal and language typology. Plus in the meanwhile, I have also discussed how language change has happened and typologically how we can account for it. So, when we say language change, I have discussed the diachronic approach plus the acquisition approach, and in the acquisition approach I have also included the use theory, like the use component of it, how language has been used in the discourse. So, when you talk about the let us say diachrony, then we have tried to figure out, let us say, word order, adposition and the noun phrase. If I remember it correctly, we also talked about the color terms, no, not color terms, probably the adjectives and stuff like that. So, but clearly I remember we did talk about the noun position, noun phrase and the adposition situation plus the word order. So, how historically it has been it has developed, or which is the form which seems to be older than the other one. Let us say SOV and SVO, which one is older, which one is newer. Similarly, noun phrase and adposition, preposition and postposition, which one is older, which one is newer. So, these are the issues related to language change. So, how language change has happened at a diachronic level, also at the acquisition level, because this is this very famous statement, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. In that case, how the child language acquisition gives us, and the theories or the understanding of child language acquisition gives us an idea about language change in a particular child language acquisition perspective, right. So, language change using acquisition method and then using the diachrony method. So, these are the two ways by which typology and language change has been discussed. So, in a nutshell, the course has been, if you ask me, I have 3 different domains. I have discipline centric, which includes, or the domain centric, syntactic domain, morphological, phonological, semantic, this at one chunk, which is the major portion of the course, almost 75%, if not 75, maybe let us say 60%. 60% of the course includes this domain specific discussions, then maybe 20% you will get universals, and the other 20% you will get typology and language change. So, that is how the course has been planned, and I sincerely hope I have executed in the same way too, without much of deviation. So, a couple of deviation here and there, that is okay, because when you teach you become yourself. So, it may not go 100% as you have planned, but I am confident, I am sure there has not been much deviation, and what I promised I have delivered through the course. But whatever issues that you have faced, whatever challenges that you have had to understand my lectures, to understand my teaching. So, I would look forward to the feedback from the participants, so that if I have to work on this course again as a rerun, that should help me to sort of improve the course. So, do share the feedback, and thank you for considering my course, for registering, for listening to me, and I hope we are going to meet again through this platform, maybe in future. And most importantly, I sincerely hope that this course has helped you to understand linguistics as an academic discipline, and I'm hopeful that it must have helped you to, or it must have given you an opportunity to approach linguistics, or to approach languages, even your first language, the languages that you speak, or your mother tongue, to approach it from a different angle. I am sure when you apply what you have studied so far in this course, and when you try to understand your own first language now, you are going to approach it in a different manner. So, thank you. Thanks again for registering for this course, and then I am happy to get to know to all of you, and we have had a very good interactive session also, and I look forward to more such interactions in future. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.